Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about the very, very best recordings of the complete Dvořák symphonies, all 9 of them, the whole kit and caboodle. Now, this talk has been a long time coming, and I've wanted to do it for a while. Dvořák as a symphonist presents certain unique problems that I've had to sort of grapple with in coming up with this list. It's not that there are too many to deal with. Actually, there are quite few. There are many more Tchaikovsky cycles or Beethoven cycles, or God knows, Brahms cycles. No, I have 13 of them here, and that really covers it. It really does. There may be something I've left out here or there, but it doesn't really make any difference. The problem with Dvořák is that he's regarded very condescendingly as a symphonist until you get to the last 3 famous symphonies. But that is so wrong. I mean, 5 and 6 are both masterpieces. 3 is arguably a masterpiece. I think number 2, which Dvořák revised late in the 1880s, is also glorious in many, many respects. You know, if 1 isn't perfect and 4 has a repetitious finale, so he wasn't perfect. But consider, Tchaikovsky's first 3 symphonies don't get as much cred as numbers 4, 5, and 6, but they aren't dismissed. They sound like Tchaikovsky. People enjoy them because they're totally characteristic of their composer. So are Dvořák's early symphonies. They are wholly characteristic. They are full of gorgeous tunes. They're beautifully scored. They're really marvelous pieces. And they deserve to be cherished and loved and played to a fairly well. Most of the time they're not. And I could have done, this talk could have gone 2 ways. I wanted to do perhaps an ideal Dvořák symphony cycle with different performances, but it isn't really possible because there aren't enough singleton versions of those early symphonies to make that a feasible proposition. I would just be pulling things out of the boxes, and you'd have to get the boxes to get the individual performances. So I might as well talk about the boxes, right? I mean, of course, you could download and assemble them other ways, but I mean, just from a reasonable point of view, and for people who like physical product, as I do, you have to go with a box to get these early symphonies. And so at this point, I'm talking about complete cycles in boxes. That's how we're going to handle this, at least for now. We shall see what the future brings. Dvořák has been dismissed as a symphonist most harmfully, in my opinion, by his own compatriots. I've read tons and tons of Dvořák scholarship, and quite frankly, Dvořák scholars are a bunch of wusses. They are the most namby-pamby, tentative, because they are wholly intimidated and under the thumb of the Brahms scholars, of the guys in Germany, just as Czechoslovakia was. And I really think that the Czechs have been far, far too cautious to try and not tread on, the great German reputation of the great German symphonists, such as Brahms and whatnot. It hasn't done them a bit of good, and it hasn't done Dvořák a bit of good. They would be so much better off not worrying what's going on in Germany and asserting themselves a little bit more and asserting the greatness of their native composers, because the Czech school is as great a school as the German school. For a long time in Central Europe, they were all mixed up. And as nationalism, got going, and the Czech nationalist school got going with Smetana and Dvořák and those guys, things segregated a little bit. But because the main market for all this stuff remained Germany, for economic as well as political reasons, it was never considered prudent to try and promote the Czech artists at the expense of the German artists. Now, I don't think this is a zero-sum game. Loving one thing doesn't mean hating another thing. There's no reason why you can't respect one and respect the other equally. But that's not the way it works in the real world, unfortunately. And that's not the way Czech scholars have thought about early Dvořák. They largely regard Dvořák before he met Brahms as quaint and charming and perhaps full of potential, but otherwise not terribly successful. And that, my friends, is simply wrong. Totally wrong. Dvořák would have been a great composer had Brahms never existed, and he was already independently achieving exactly what Brahms wanted to achieve in creating a new take on the classical symphony. Because, as I pointed out in my video on Dvořák's Fifth, he had already written 5 symphonies before Brahms even encountered him, and he encountered Brahms, and his Fifth was quite likely an inspiration for Brahms's Third. After that, the two were friends who operated on really an equal basis. It wasn't as if one was copying the other. They were enormously inspired by each other. And so I really believe that these early Dvořák works need to be taken seriously, and a successful symphony cycle has to take them seriously. So I have 13 symphony cycles here, and I'm going to go through them one at a time, and I want to play you one cogent musical example from one of them. We'll get there anon. First of all, there are 3 cycles that I do not recommend. And it's a pity not to recommend them, but the other ones are just better. So I don't want you to waste your time. They are Andrew Davis on Sony. Now, this one had some really cool stuff in it at one point. There was vocal music and other stuff. It's not in this box because they did the American flag. Michael Tilson Thomas recorded that. And these things, I seem to recall that these were all somehow packaged a little bit differently. Anyway, it doesn't make any difference because we're talking about symphonies. These performances are straightforward and unfussy and really pretty much forgettable. And it's a shame, but that's the truth. This is with the Philharmonia, too, which plays quite well. They're not bad. It's just that you can do much better. So, the heck with that. Let's forget about it. The other major disappointment was Bělohlavek with the Czech Phil, his last Dvořák cycle with the concertos. Absolutely dull as ditch water. These performances are so boring. I was so bitterly disappointed with this cycle. The concertos, on the other hand, are quite good. The piano concerto is with, let's see, who's the pianist here? Oh, it's Garrick Olson. It's quite good. The violin concerto with Frank Peter Zimmermann is very good. The cello concerto with Alicia Wallerstein she's great, but the recording is a mess. The balances are all off. This was just, I don't know what happened. Something terrible. It really went wrong. And the Czech Phil doesn't sound as characterful as it used to back in the great old days of Talich and Churl and those people, So forget about Bělohlavek. It's just not good. Not good at all. The third one, which I don't have sitting here, it's over the overflow room, is José Cerebriae. Now, I think Cerebriae is a terrific conductor. I like a lot of what he's done. And he's done a lot of Dvořák in his career. But for some reason, this symphony cycle just doesn't catch fire. I don't know whether it's the Bournemouth Symphony. I don't know whether it's the Sonics or whether it's just something about it sounds a little bit tired to me. And as these discs were coming out, I was reviewing them individually. You can see some of the reviews on Classics Today. I really wanted to like them, and I was full of enthusiasm for them. I thought, finally, we'll have a great modern Dvořák cycle or another one in digital sound, a newer one. And it just didn't materialize. The performances just lay there. And I found that after listening to them on multiple occasions, they just don't stick in the memory at all. And the set comes with, the legends, which are very nice, and not very interesting Slavonic dances, too. I don't know what happened to Cerebriae in these recordings, but somehow everybody was just a little bit off. And so I don't recommend that cycle either. It's also very out of print. You can get individual discs, but the whole thing, forget it. Not worth the trouble. So that leaves us with 13 minus 3, 10. 10 cycles that are definitely worth considering and that you will probably enjoy, hopefully enjoy. Now, the first I've talked about briefly because I talked about this box. This is Gunzenhauser's set with the Slovak Phil or the Slovak Radio or the Slovak something. I'll tell you what it is. Hang on, it's a Slovak something. And let's see, hang on a minute. It is is the Slovak Philharmonic, yes. And the Slovak Radio Symphony. Okay, it's both of them with Stephen Kunzenhauser on Naxos. Now, these are not the best symphony performances. They are characterful in the sense that that orchestra sounds kind of like a second-tier Czech Philharmonic. That is, you hear the characterful woodwinds, not always in tune, but characterful, and some interesting balances between strings and winds, and the performances are fresh and lively and nice, but they're not top flight. But the box has got so much good stuff in it. When I even turn it right side out, inside whatever it is here, there's great stuff in here. And the symphonies are nice. I mean, they're nice. It's not gonna win any awards, but they're okay. And so I tell you that because I really like that box. But the symphonies themselves, if you're getting just a symphony cycle, you're best off looking elsewhere as well. So now we are in elsewhere. We're in elsewhere land. And let's talk about the elsewhere recordings. First, remember these? This is Nimi Järvi. Nimi Järvi with the Scottish National Orchestra, which even in those days had not yet become the Royal Scottish National Orchestra. This is on Chandos. This is a very good Dvořák cycle. The sound quality varies the way Chandos recordings sometimes do. You've got these really, really good ones, and then some sort of like hollow, blowsy, kind of diffuse ones. And I don't know why they couldn't make them all sound the same, but the performances are exciting and dynamic. There's a very good 8th Symphony in here. The 2nd is quite good. Some really good stuff. Very, very good stuff. And I enjoy hearing this cycle. It's underrated. Definitely underrated. And it's also quite expensive, I think. So maybe you don't want to invest in it when you can get so much else that's as good or better. But I have to mention it because some of Järvi's better work, and it deserves some credit. So that was that one. Next, we have Václav Neumann with the Czech Philharmonic. Now, this is his 2nd cycle, his digital one. We're going to talk about his first one shortly. These are beautiful performances with the Czech Phil. The 7th in here is just a knockout. It's one of the great, great 7ths. His New World is also terrific. There are some really first-rate performances in here. The digital sound is clean and clear, but a little glassy. It's a little bit early digital. It doesn't have quite the warmth of his earlier ones. The performances are very, very similar. So it's a question of partly of sonics, partly of the balances and sound of the orchestra in the earlier period, because there are quite a few early Dvořák. There's a partial early Dvořák set that Neumann did that's in a Superfund box of early Neumann recordings, which I shall have to talk about at a future time. But these are quite good, and they're very, very beautiful, and certainly worth hearing. Next, Peszek. This was on Virgin, and this is a combination of Royal Liverpool Philharmonic and the Czech Philharmonic. And I actually like the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic ones better than the Czech Philharmonic ones as they are recorded here. Peszek was a good conductor. These are good, solid, exciting performances, kind of small in scope. There's more grandeur in Dvořák than Peszek evolves, and the Czech Phil than Peszek evokes, pardon me. And the Czech Phil ones, like I said, they're kind of soft-edged. The Royal Liverpool ones have more pizzazz. But what's really cool about this box, frankly, it's on Errato now for some reason, I don't know, are the couplings. Because you get the Wood Dove, you get the Carnival Overture, you get, let's see, what else is this? The My Home Overture, you get the Scherzo Capriccioso, you get the Czech Suite, you get Otello in Nature's Realm, and finally the American Suite. I mean, and they're all really good, really well done. This is a nice set to have if you want like all of this other stuff. I mean, I'm just looking at this going, ooh, this is yummy. I mean, beautiful Czech Suite. It's really, for the couplings, it's almost better to get it for the couplings. So, and then you have a spare Dvořák symphony cycle that's also got really good stuff in it. Some really fine performances. It's worth considering. It's very inexpensive. I mean, it's definitely worth considering. Sleeper alert. Sleeper, sleeper, sleeper. This is a cycle that blew my mind. It is so good. It's on Ohm's label, the Ohm's label. It's Ivan Anguelov. Ivan Anguelov of the Slovak Radio Symphony Orchestra, sounding a bit better than they did for Stephen Gunzenhauser on Naxos. This is a much later recording. A couple of decades had improved them considerably. This is just good. It's really good. There are no bad performances in here. It's extremely consistent. The performances are fiery and passionate and full of rhythm and inflection and accent and all of those things you've got to hear in a really good Dvořák performance. They're all in here. This one was a complete shock to me. I didn't expect it, and I was so happy to make its acquaintance. I return to it quite often. The style of playing is the Czech school. In other words, no exposition, repeats, things like that. You know what I mean? But it's good. It's really, really good and very well recorded. It's a shocker. If you can still find this and it's inexpensive and you're like a Dvořák collector and for some reason you missed it, this is one of the great sleeper cycles. It's really, really good. But now we come down to what? The final one, two, I think 4 of them. Yeah, something like that. Final 4. Or 5. How many here? 5. See, there's more than we thought. These are all really top-notch. Completely, totally, recommendably top-notch. Number 1, Sweetener on Brilliant Classics. This is like incredibly inexpensive. This also has no weak performances. They are marvelous. The weakest performance is the Scherzo of the 4th Symphony because of the creaking chair. It happens to be a great performance of the 4th Symphony and a great performance of the Scherzo. But the damn creaking chair, you know, it's going da 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 da. Oh, it's so annoying. It's even more annoying than my singing. And that is annoying because some of you commenters keep saying, oh, I love your videos, but please don't sing. Ha! Fat chance of that, suckers. Anyway, this is great Dvořák. And to show you, I am going to play you a little bit of the 3rd movement of Dvořák Symphony number 2, because here is a cycle where the early symphonies are done just as well as the late ones, and they come off sounding fabulous. This is my favorite recording of the 2nd Symphony. The 2nd Symphony, let me just tell you a minute something here. The 2nd Symphony is a beautiful, beautiful work. It's the first of Dvořák's 3, he wrote 3, pastoral symphonies, pastoral style. The works in question being numbers 2, 5, and 8. All of them have a notably pastoral character to them. But the 2nd Symphony, this 3rd movement, technically it's a scherzo, you know, as an A-B-A, scherzo and trio sort of thing. But I don't know, it's big and it's long and it's beefy and it's very developmental and it is gorgeous and it sounds like absolutely nobody else in the universe. And it was written in the 1860s. I mean, think about that, you know? It's really astonishing because after the 1st Symphony fell apart or got lost, Dvořák just wrote another one. And one of the indications of just what a great composer Dvořák was is the growth from the 1st Symphony to the 2nd Symphony. I mean, it's amazing. It's like night and day. The problem with the 2nd Symphony is that it's quite long and the 1st movement has to be kept moving. It needs a lot of energy and juice to keep it going. And the slow movement is also quite long, and it's beautiful. It's actually based conceptually in terms of sound and what Dvořák was doing on, I think, it's my theory, on the love scene from Berlioz's Romeo and Juliet, which Dvořák knew. He played it. He played all of this music as a violist in the orchestra. And, you know, people have not paid sufficient attention to the music that he learned as a violist in the opera pit, in the orchestra. I mean, in his operas, you can hear the influences pretty clearly of Verdi and other composers, but in the symphonies as well. And it reminds me very much of the love scene from Romeo and Juliet. It's a very beautiful movement. But this scherzo, this scherzo, I listened to it separately. It is so beautiful. I'm going to play you a good chunk of it, a good 2 and a bit minutes so that you can hear it for yourself. Because if you don't know this, you don't know Dvořák. And this tells us that the composer we know and love, even if he wasn't as formally polished as he later became, he was there. He was there from the beginning. And the music shows, the music proves it. It's there. And here it is. Third movement, Symphony Number 2. Isn't that just fabulous? I mean, come on, folks. Who could not love that? You have to be out of your mind. It's exquisite. It's fantastic. So anyway, Sweetener's Dvořák cycle is absolutely first rate. Next, well, the next bunch are the predictable, familiar favorites for the most part. And if you're a Dvořák collector, you know them. I don't have to spend a lot of time on them. Kertez with the London Symphony. A wonderful cycle. He takes all the exposition repeats. The performances might just be a touch heavy in places. And because Kertez recorded a couple of the other ones with the Vienna Philharmonic before he did this whole cycle, he's competing with himself. And that leads some people to say, well, I like the earlier one better. And that may diminish the value of this set. But I don't think so. I think these are wonderful performances. The London Symphony has that woodsy, earthy tone with very forward woodwind balances. It's a wonderful Dvořák sound. It really is. And you get here also a bunch of the tone poems, a bunch of the overtures, and the Requiem. A great performance of the Requiem, which is a terribly neglected masterpiece. So this is a good budget box to get on Decca, the Kertez Dvořák cycle. Next is, of course, Komalek with the Berlin Philharmonic. Now, these are also astonishing performances. There are some performances in here that are amazing. And Komalek really nails the Fourth Symphony, which is kind of a surprise. And he really nails the Eighth, and what's the other one? Sixth, the Scherzo of Six, where he just hammers the syncopated offbeats of the timpani and the scherzo like no one else ever has. And the finale of the Fifth, I mean, they're just knockouts. The one minor disappointment in here is the Seventh. I mean, if it were a bad performance, it would be an epic disappointment. But it's not a bad performance, not by any means. It's a very good performance, just not quite as great as the greatest of the others. And since the Seventh is supposedly the greatest symphony, you want an unimpeachably great performance of it. And oh well. But this New World was like the standard. It was like the Kleiber Beethoven Fifth of Dvořák symphonies. It was the one everybody got. And it's terrific. There's nothing not to love. So Komalek is worth considering. And there's also like all kinds of cool couplings in here. He did the tone poems and other things. So, there's some other stuff that's worth having. Very, very good. 2 to go. You want to know what the top one is? Hang in there. We're getting there. Okay. Number 2. The older Neumann cycle. I love this. I played some samples of this for you guys, and the comments came in with, wow, that sounds great. Let me get that. This is the stereo. It's stereo. It's not mono, but it's not the digital cycle. This is the Dvořák cycle that shows you what the Czech Philharmonic can really do when it's playing the hometown guy with hometown color and hometown proprietary pride in the endeavor. I think this is a glorious Dvořák cycle, and I love the warmth and bigness of the sound, but the clarity, too, with the Czech woodwinds cutting through the texture of those piercing trumpets. And gosh, it's great. And Neumann was just a touch more energetic and livelier in this cycle than he later was in the digital cycle. It's absolutely glorious. It's on Superfun, and you really should have it. It also, this is the box of symphonic works. You get all kinds of other stuff, concert overtures and the symphonic poems, and what's not to love. However, I have to pick one as my top recommendation. And it's funny because it's a flawed top recommendation, but the other bits of it are so great that I just feel that I can't let it go unacknowledged. And that is Rovitsky. Now, this cycle was also a bit of an underdog, something of a sleeper, because it was made for Philips at about the same time as the Kertez cycle with the same orchestra. So you've got the London Symphony Orchestra. Rovitsky also takes all the repeats. It's just fantastic. However, the tempos are just 10-15% quicker. Overall, this is the most exciting Dvořák cycle out there. Like the Komalek, the Achilles heel is the Seventh. The Seventh is, I would say, a very Brahmsian performance. It's darker, it's heavier, it's not like the other ones in the cycle. And for that reason, it tends to stand out. The approach is a perfectly legitimate one. The performance is a very good one. It really is. But if only Rovitsky had played the Seventh as crisply and excitingly as he did all the other symphonies, this would be the Dvořák symphony cycle for the ages. But as it stands, because of the fantastic versions of all of the earlier symphonies, it's just absolutely splendid. And you also get some nice couplings. You get My Home and the Carnival Overture, and you get, let's see, the Hussite and Otello. I mean, it's good stuff. This is also now on Decca because it used to be on Philips, but now it's Decca. So Decca has two of them. They've got Kertez and they've got this one. And this one has always gotten shorter shrift because Kertez, of course, was conducting in London and all the British critics were jumping all over Kertez and they were ignoring Rovitsky. But Rovitsky is just a barn burner of a conductor in this music. And this overall is the cycle I find myself listening to most frequently for all of the symphonies except the Seventh. And even then, I listen to the Seventh once in a while, but basically, Rovitsky is my pick for the top Dvořák symphony cycle. So there they are. All of the Dvořák symphony cycles that matter. It's really a nice selection, but it's also a little sad because there are so few. When you consider how many versions there are of 7, 8, and 9, and how popular Dvořák is, you would think that there would be 20, 30, 40 symphony cycles like there are of Tchaikovsky cycles. A couple of dozen at least, but there aren't. And the reason there aren't is because of this this terrible, terrible prejudice that's out there against early Dvořák. It's weighed down all of these cycles like a chain around Dvořák's neck. And we are going to be the first to try and remove that chain by giving these works the attention and love they deserve. And that means we're going to keep on listening. So thank you, folks, for joining me. I hope this has given you some food for thought and some reason to delve into those Dvořák boxes. Thanks a million, and take care.